听众朋友大家好，欢迎收听军事相对论。上周的国际焦点呢，全部都聚焦在美国总统拜登跟日本首相岸田文雄的双边会谈，还有史无前例的美日菲律宾三方会谈。那关于美日菲的合作呢，我在5月的时候会有来自现场的采访，因此呢，我决定到时候再做一个更完整的分享。我今天会先把焦点放在这个美日的领袖会谈。那这次岸田文雄去美国进行国事访问，是日本9年来第一次。那作为东道主的拜登可以说是给足了面子，不仅有盛大的欢迎仪式呢，他们还出动国务院的社群媒体小组去日本捐赠的樱花树下面来跟美国的国民来做访问。那有位受访者，我不确定他是不是被塞好的，但是呢，他讲了一句蛮耐人寻味的话。他说如果说美国在大西洋最好的盟友是英国的话，那日本就是美国在太平洋最好的盟友。这句话其实没有错，因为我印象很深刻，我曾经有跟一位韩国青瓦台的官员聊过，他跟我抱怨，他觉得美国比较重视日本，不重视韩国。他的观点是说如果有一天南韩被北韩攻击了，甚至被打败了，那美国呢仍然可以退守到日本，所以美国无论如何都会把日本给顾好。但是如果你从日本的观点来看的话，这是因为在二战之后美军他占领了日本，大幅限缩了日本的军事能力，因此呢他们也要承担来保护日本的责任。我举个例子你知道吗？其实东京空域不是由日本管辖，而是美军，因为在附近呢有一个美军的横田机场。讲白话文来讲的话，就是日本首都空域居然不是日本自己的，这讲起来其实有点羞辱人就是在美国对日本有点上对下的一个概念，但这个就是在过去一直以来美日同盟的一个背景。那在这个上下的关系之下呢，过去美国根本没有跟自卫队联合作战指挥的一个系统，因为根本不需要，自卫队就把自己的领土给顾好就好了。那在美国的所有军队行动呢，都是由总部在夏威夷的印太司令部的3星上将来指挥。但是我们看到韩国的话，他们是由驻韩美军的4星上将直接跟韩国的军队来协调作战。但是随着近年来美国国力的衰退中国威胁的崛起乌克兰战争爆发、以哈冲突等等的问题接连产生之后，很明显的美国它分身乏术，也有点自顾不暇，那日本就解套了。那美国呢，也希望日本能够承担更多的责任，因此从几年前开始，他们解禁了集体自卫权。那这次双边会谈最主要的工作就是升级美日安保条约，规划未来由美方指派一名4星上将，刚刚提到现在是3星，那未来要派一名4星上将跟日本最新的联合指挥架构来对接。也就是说，未来发生事情的话，就不用再等到夏威夷拍板，也没有时差的问题。那会谈呢，也提到日本将增加了国防预算的支出，升级国防通讯任务，合作生产飞弹，甚至走向外太空。但是更多的细节呢，我接下来就要跟夏威夷智库太平洋论坛 Pacific Forum 的副主任 Brad Glosserman 来对谈。我曾经在2014、2016这个环太平洋演习期间访问过他，他对印太地区的动态非常清楚。那他现在呢也常驻在日本做研究，我们就来听听看他的分析。Okay, now let's welcome Brad Glosserman to join us our podcast. Hello, welcome.
It's great to be here.
Well, I think you must be very busy recently because the bilateral and trilateral meetings in Washington, D.C.
Well, there's a lot going on everywhere. I mean, this week is a bit of a spike, but to be very honest, this is just part, I think, of what is an ongoing evolution, transformation of the regional environment.
Okay, because I have several questions for you, okay? The first question is, why do the US and Japan want to escalate the cooperation level right now? I mean, why it is time to do that?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, most plainly because it's sort of necessary as dictated by external events. It seems to me that the threat environment is becoming more threatening. You're seeing greater aggression and prospects of courts of behavior, not only by Beijing, but by North Korea as well. Russia is making ominous noises. There is a growing sense, I think, that the region is becoming more militarized, not only, again, with China, but you're just seeing other countries as well developing new capabilities and new possibilities. And so Japan is both evolving itself, the United States as well as evolving. And so what you need is both the management of those individual capabilities as well as the way that they interact together, so that the alliance, as I've always liked to say, is more than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 = 3. So all of those together, I think, really are driving the two governments to, try to ensure that they're best prepared for any of the contingencies. And you have to acknowledge one of the contingencies, of course, is the possibility of a Donald Trump election victory in the November 2024 presidential election. So one of the goals is to try to lock in as much as possible the changes, the modernizations, the cooperation between the two allies. The problem, of course, is that there really is no way, I'm afraid, that we can be comfortable and confident that we're going to Trump-proof the alliance, if you will. But we can certainly, and this is what the governments are doing, certainly try to make that to advance that as far as possible.
So what exactly the role Japan will play in the U.S. global security strategy?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. And I think you have to look at, to answer that properly, and it takes far more time than you and I have today in a podcast, but I think you have to look at both where we're talking about the contingency first, and then, of course, what the respective roles of each country would be, both an ally and then as just a sovereign nation. So clearly, in the context of a defense of Japan situation, which there are territorial disputes with China, as I think you know, well, and frankly, I think Taiwan's involved in that as well. So in that event, what you've seen Japan is develop a far, far more capable military, where I think historically there was an implicit belief among many Japanese that the United States would do the bulk of the fighting, even in Japan's defense. And I think that's become recognized as unrealistic, and thus Japan has modernized its capabilities. And so we're seeing Japan will be forced to lead, I think, obviously, and rightly so, in that particular case. Then we move to broader regional contingencies, whether we're talking about the Korean Peninsula up to the northwest, or if we're talking to Taiwan or the Southwest Passages. In those cases, the United States is obviously going to be on the lead, but Japan is going to be providing either maintenance, repair, logistics. It's a flow-through point in both cases, that a lot of the equipment will be coming through the bases in Japan. There's been a big question about the ability of the Japanese to actually provide maintenance to U.S. ships that are damaged in a conflict. The problem there not only being whether Japanese law permits it, but whether the U.S. law does as well, and they're going to have to modify that. The Japanese, I think, will be providing ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, maritime domain awareness, MDA. The Japanese will be providing us a full spectrum of intelligence and information. The idea that Japan would be on the front end shooting is silly, except obviously in the defense of Japanese assets.
Yep.
And then, of course, there'll also be contribution in terms of the diplomatic and, frankly, coercive diplomatic measures that would be employed against any particular adversary, as we've seen in the Ukraine situation, as we've seen in UN resolutions regarding North Korea and its nuclear proliferation. And then that, of course, brings us into all sorts of other questions about economic cooperation in the region more broadly, and then I think even beyond that throughout the world. And that is all designed both to create, to integrate, and this is, I think, poorly understood, but greater integration of the U.S. and the Japanese economies to ensure that they're both more resilient, more protected, that they maximize their bang, if you will, for their buck when they decide to act together in defense of economic interests. But it's also, again, another way of Japan consolidating its relationship with the United States, demonstrating that it's a good partner, proving to the United States that it is on its side and it's worth defending. And so that, I think, is driving a lot of Japanese decision-making as well. So as a global partner, you're also going to see in peacetime, and then we haven't even, like I said, this is a long answer. In peacetime, you see efforts to develop infrastructure, to provide, to develop countries generally, to offer trade opportunities, to help them rise up the economic ladder, cybersecurity, all of the other initiatives that go to promote development for other countries, which is, in the traditional Japanese thinking about security, just as important as hard security issues.
Yeah,
that was a really long-winded answer.
Yeah, because the former President Trump accused Japan and Korea of not paying enough for U.S. protection. So do you think Japan is ready to take more responsibility? Because you are stationed in Japan, right? So what do you feel about your opinion around you?
Well, I mean, it depends on who you're asking in some ways. I mean, yes, the Japanese leadership has understood that it has to step up. And if you read the language of Kishida's remarks prior to his trip, his speech to Congress, I was just reading it this morning, his remarks in the joint declaration, I mean, everything is positive. It says, yes, Japan recognizes that we have to do more. But I mean, honestly, you could trace that language all the way back to Junichiro Koizumi 20-something years ago, when he would argue that Japan has been the chief beneficiary of the international order. We need to do more to give back. And for the, I think, more responsible politicians in Japan, that has always been the motivator. There have been some that have been nationalist and have felt as though there were other factors. But even someone I think is as conservative as Shinzo Abe, and I know that he's a very controversial figure, would recognize, or has recognized, or did recognize, the need to step up as a responsible nation in the international system. And just as a plug, I have a book coming out next month with Gil Rosman, a Princeton sociologist, that it looks at the Abe foreign policy legacy and makes that case in a far more complete manner. But yes, the Japanese, I think, are understanding the requirements. And this also requires putting money on the table for development programs, of working and collaborating, and the subsidiary steps that follow that. So, for example, I don't know if it's gotten attention in Taiwan, but the Japanese have revised or are revising their information security laws and the security clearance system. And what that's all about really is to create a system to protect information in ways that instill confidence in partners like the United States or the UK or Australia or Italy, since given cooperation in the fighter jet program, that you're going to be able to protect the intellectual property. And that's the domestic changes that the Japanese recognize they have to do in order to then accomplish the other objectives that are as important. So I think, yes, there is an understanding. The public has been slow. And to me, the key in the issues that are germane to you and your audience in Taiwan is a very complete and accurate understanding between the Americans and the Japanese as to who will do what in a Taiwan contingency. And it's been hard. It's the question I ask all of my friends that work in this space in both countries. I don't have a security clearance, so I don't expect them to tell me, and I would never ask them. But the question is, are you comfortable with your understanding of what Japan will do? And invariably, the Americans say, we want them to do more, but yes, we think we're in a good place. And so that's really the key, is making sure that when there is a crisis, that both sides understand what their roles are. Right now, we're trying to raise the level of Japanese involvement, and that's happening, but it's slow, and getting both political understanding and then the public's understanding that there will be consequences and costs as a result. That's taking a little more time. That's why look at the language of what Kishida's talked about for the last couple of days. It's all been responsibility, responsibility, responsibility.
But take Taiwan Strait as an example, right? So what can we expect Japan do when a crisis happens in Taiwan Strait? And how do they divide work with the United States?
Well, the U.S. will be on the point. The Japanese will not be shooting. The Japanese will not be in a combat role or combat position. Japan will be surveilling the air, the water, the sky, providing the information that allows American operations. Japan will be a through point for logistical support for American forces, and perhaps Taiwan, as material goes through the large bases in Japan. Japan will provide the construction, the supply, repairs, maintenance of American assets that are either damaged or just depleted during the course of a contingency. But I don't think, for example, Japanese ships are going to be running interference or protecting American assets in the strait unless they are there for their own reasons and then are fired upon. But the idea that it's going to be Japanese Marines on the beach or Japanese ships on patrol is not going to happen. The Japanese will stay in their territorial waters as I think is constitutionally required or legally required, and then will act as their subsequent actions will be dependent upon what they're reacting to. But they won't be, as we say, the tip of the spear.
But do you think they will offer like airport strip to Taiwanese airports? I mean, a military airport to...
I think if a Taiwanese plane were to be in a position where the alternatives were to bail out or to or land, the Japanese would say land. I would think that in a crisis of that nature, the Japanese too, landing is the easy part. It's taking off after that that's going to be hard.
All right. Yeah.
I would think that the Japanese would be prepared to offer that, but my money would say that you and I and anybody that's not working on the operational plans is not going to know that until the time of a crisis. I mean, it seems to me logically extremely difficult to see a Japanese prime minister, because that's where the decision would have to be made, to say, no, do not let that plane take off again in the event of a crisis such that there's... Now, what may well end up happening is the plane will take off without knowledge of the Japanese political authorities, right? But that's one of the convenient fudges. But I do not see how a Japanese prime minister can say, we are going to deny Taiwan its fighting capabilities in a crisis and not, at that point, jeopardize his relationship both with Taiwan and the United States.
Okay. Okay, well, according to some reports, the US is also discussing with Australia and the UK for Japan's participation in AUKUS, AUKUS. So in your opinion, will Japan be a future participant?
Probably. I think so. But mind you, what we're talking about is cooperation in what's called Pillar 2, which is the emerging technology. That, of course, requires, at a starting point, that information security law. The Japanese have been interested in AUKUS since it was first revealed. If I recall, the Japanese had a very short notice about it ahead of time. The problem, of course, is that the British, Japan has both reciprocal access agreements or other military accords with both Canberra and London. So in some ways, it's the natural inclusion. The problem is just that at this moment, truthfully, the submarine issue is tough. Okay. The United States is having some issues of its own. And so I think the concern among both, particularly in Canberra, but also again in London, is not wanting to distract and introduce other issues that could prove to be a problem for that Pillar 1, which is seen as the most immediate concern of AUKUS. But over time, sure, I could see AUKUS, I could see Japan joining, I could see South Korea joining, and perhaps some other countries as well.
But China also accuses AUKUS as a NATO Asian version. Is this description correct, or what's your opinion?
No, no, it's not. AUKUS is, first of all, a submarine acquisition plan, right? That's all it is. It's about building submarines. That's Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is about developing new technologies. Neither of those strikes me as involving national military coordination or regional security coordination in ways that would come close to the multilateral security initiative that's NATO. The Chinese are very, very unhappy about this for a bunch of different reasons. But mostly what unnerves the Chinese is that other countries in the region, that the United States is consolidating its relationships with allies, that the partners are building relationships among themselves, and you're seeing the emergence of a regional security network or a larger security structure. Network is, I think, too fine a word, that is alert to the dangers caused by Chinese coercion and could potentially stop it. And that makes China very nervous.
Okay. The final question, because President Biden also hosts a trilateral meeting with not only with Kishida, but with Philippine President Marcos Jr. for the very first time. So how will the two countries help Philippines in the region?
Well, a bunch of ways. They already are. Obviously, number one, the United States is the Philippines' ally. In fact, the Philippines is the U.S.'s oldest ally in the region. You've seen the modification in the last year or so of the expansion of U.S. access to bases from 5 to 9 now, many of which are really, really, I think, mostly preparing for a Taiwan contingency, although not exclusively so. Japan and the U.S. are conducting exercises with the Philippines military bilaterally and trilaterally and with other countries to enhance capabilities. The Japanese have provided Coast Guard vessels and a $524 million loan, I believe, to provide another 12 vessels, I want to say, a lot, Coast Guard ships. Equally important, Japan is working with the Philippines on infrastructure development and the larger sets. Again, this notion of security extending beyond hard military questions. But all of this, I think, is in service of this ideal to strengthen the capacity of neighboring countries to help them resist Chinese predation, to protect their own sovereignty, to demonstrate a commitment and a solidarity of purpose that will make these countries more confident and will, I think, instill doubts in China about the ease with which it will expand its influence in the region.
But does that mean the two countries take sides on the disputed waters and islands?
Officially, the United States has said that an attack on Article 5, an attack on a Philippines vessel would constitute a means of invoking the Mutual Defense Treaty. We seem to have agreed that, Second Thomas Shoal has been decided to be, by the International Court of the International Tribunal 2016 ruling is essentially, without making that determination, that it is territorial waters. So I guess actually, as I think about it, the answer is no. The U.S. that doesn't require the U.S. to take sides. What it requires is the U.S. to say, regardless of who owns this land, if China kills a Philippine soldier, sailor, Marine, Air Force officer, and then that is an act of aggression against the Philippines, and the treaty comes into effect. Similarly with Japan, you don't necessarily have to, I think, say that the land or whatever the territory belongs to one country or not.
Okay, that's good. So thank you so much, Brad, for your comments. I think we learned a lot from you, and I'm looking forward to discussing more topics with you in the future if you have time, and Anytime. We are happy to do that. Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. 好，我简单的整理一下，美国为什么会跟日本在这个时间点来强化安全合作呢？是因为北韩跟中国的威胁增加，而日本也需要在区域局势上面多帮忙美国来分担工作。那我刚刚也问到，就是台海问题发生的时候，他们双边角色的分工。那 Brad 也说明说，日本不会是开枪的那个人，但是他会替美国做后援跟监视。至于能不能会不会加入 AUKUS， 就是澳英美三边安全伙伴关系，那其实就如同许多外媒的一个分析现在还言之过早，但是在所谓的第二支柱，也就是超音速武器跟 AI 的研发上面是有合作的可能性。那如果你需要更完整的英文翻译的话，我会放在军事相对论的网站，那欢迎你听完之后也可以去比对一下文章来做一下比较。那在这边也做一下小小的广告来呼吁一下，如果你觉得这些内容对你有帮助的话，也欢迎多给我们一些抖内跟支持跟鼓励。那节目说明栏都有相关的连结，也谢谢所有支持我们的听众朋友。那我们今天的节目就先到这边喽，我们下周再见，拜拜。